Namaste students, welcome to your social science history class. Today we will move on to the 7th chapter, Europe in the Middle Ages. The learning objectives of this chapter is what were the conditions in Europe during the Middle Ages, the meaning of feudalism, different forms of feudalism, advantages and disadvantages of feudalism and the decline of feudalism. Now we will move on to the Middle Ages, the period of European history extending from about 500 to 1400 to 1500 CE is traditionally known as the Middle Ages. The term was the first used by 15th century scholars to designate the period between their own time and the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The period is often considered to have its own internal divisions, either early and late, or early, central, or high and late. Although once regarded as a time of uninterpreted ignorance, superstition, and the social oppression, the Middle Ages are now understood as a dynamic period during which the idea of Europe as a distinct cultural unit emerged. During the late antiquity and the early Middle Ages, political, social, economic, and cultural structures were profoundly reorganized as Roman imperial traditions gave way to those of the Germanic peoples who established the kingdoms in the former Western Empire. New forms of political leaderships were introduced. The population of Europe was gradually Christianized and monasticism was established as an ideal form of religious life. These developments reached their mature form in the 9th century during the reign of Charlemagne and the other rulers of the Carolingian dynasty, who oversaw a broad cultural revival known as the Carolingian Renaissance. In the history of Europe, the Middle Ages or the medieval period lasted approximately from the 5th to the late of 15th century children. Similarly to the post-classical periods of global history. It began with the fall of the Western Roman Empire and transitioned into the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery. The Middle Ages is the middle period of the three traditional divisions of Western history. First one is the classical antiquity, the second one is the medieval period, and the last one is the modern period. The medieval period is itself subdivided again into two. That is not into two children, it is divided into three. That is early, high and late Middle Ages. Now let us know about the city of Rome during the Middle Ages children. Let us begin by considering the importance of the idea of Rome in the medieval mind. On the one hand, there was ancient prestige of the city. The capital of the greatest empire of the world had known, the seat of a civilization and art so far above the most of the medieval ages could attain. They may have known the little about the true history of ancient world, or the meaning of it remains. But the glamour of the past and the legends which grew up combined to form a conception of almost supernatural grandeur which dominated the medieval imagination. On the other hand, children, Rome was the holy city of the West, the seat of the visible head of the Catholic Church, the shrine of the princes of the apostles Peter and Paul, and of more bodies of the saints and more relics than any other place in the world, and was one of the three pilgrimages, the other being the Jerusalem and the Compostela. We may say that physically and materially, what kept Rome together and reserved its integrity and continuity throughout the Dark Ages was its walls. Rome, in the days of its greatness as capital of the Roman Empire, was an unwalled city. Almost at the end of the ancient period, when the barbarian invasions were becoming a real and tangible danger even to Italy and the heart of the empire, Rome was fortified by the Aurelian, and his walls were restored by the Arcadians and the Honorites in 402. When the Goths were threatening, these ancient walls, once built, were never allowed to fall into the serious decay and are standing today. Every age has left its mark on them in the form of restorations and renewals, and though they did not give absolute immunity, for Rome has been captured again and again, they as often saved it from invasion and devastation, and formed a protection and shelter behind which it could cover from the storms which from time to time swept over it. They have enabled it to justify its title of the eternal city. Now we will move on to the decline of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, which was 1 till 395 BCE, broke into two. That is, the Western Roman Empire was in existence from 395 to 476 BCE till the fall of the Romulus Augustulus. The Eastern Roman Empire was in power from 395 BCE to 1453 CE. It was also called as the Byzantine Empire. The period children between the 5th century and 15th century, we call this as the Middle Ages, as I told you before. The beginning of the medieval Europe begins with the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The medieval Europe ends with the capture of Constantinople by the Turks in 1453 CE. The entire medieval period was called as the Dark Ages of the Empire. Dark Ages of Europe. Later, the medieval period was divided into three, as I told, the beginning, the middle, and the end. So after this division, the beginning stage of the medieval period, we call that as the Dark Age, children. The Roman Empire, it was under the control of the landlords. So these landlords were called as the plebeians. They were called as the patricians. And these patricians, they had consolidated all the political powers in the name of a senate. So the poor of Rome, they were called as the plebeian, and they had no political rights, and they were the slaves. In the name of the slavery, the slave owners had made slaves as their private property. They started making the benefits from the slaves where they worked hard, and every slave was the private property of a slave owners. The slaves did lowly jobs, all types of jobs, and they were ill-treated. They had to work under the constant threat of punishment. All the achievements in the field of like architecture, culture, philosophy, and art were the results of the work of the slaves. Slaves were doing all the works, and the owners had free time to spend. They involved themselves in the creative works. With the end of the Western Roman Empire, the medieval period starts in Europe. 1,000 years of barrenness appeared in Europe after rich cultural contribution by Greeks and Romans. This period we called it as Dark Ages. This period was a period of transition with the rise of the barbaric races, and feudalism was born. We can see the problems. What were the main reasons for the fall of the Roman Empire? Problems, that is the economic. Trade was also disrupted, and no new gold or silver coin sources were there, which raises the Inca taxes, and they created more money, and soil in Italy and Western Europe were increasing less fertile. You can see here. And also we have the Emperor Constantine. These are the reasons. The embrace Christianity due to the invasion of the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. Victory over the Milvian Bridge made him the sole ruler of Rome, and this was the first Christian Roman Empire, and it also issued the Edict of Milan, which followed the Christians to worship freely. And also the empire, it builds a new city called as the Byzantine, and the new city Constantinople, it was renamed as Constantinople. Now it is in modern Turkey. So the Eastern Empire flourishes due to trade and wealth. When we move on to the political, the citizens were losing their patriotism. The government started having their control over the military, and they had a very bad emperors, terrible emperors like Nero, Commodus, and Caligula, who murdered, raped, and impoverished their people. When we move on to the military, there was a low funds for defense, and the mercenaries, that is the foreign soldiers, were hired who accepted low salary, and soldiers were less disciplined and they were loyal. So the Rome, besieged by various tribes from modern day Germany and France, Huns from Russia, Central Asia, invaded Eastern Europe and forced the German Visigoths into the Roman territory. So, we see the greatness of the Roman Empire. Rome was the most powerful empire Europe that had ever had. This is the ancient Rome. And the Roman Empire fell outside the attack and diseases, and also the Middle Ages began as the Christian Church replaced the governments as a central authority. When we tell it is a dark age, why dark? Historians and the others since patriarch continue to use the phrase dark ages. They argued that during these centuries, following the fall of Roman Empire, we see that the Europe was in a state of a cultural where a time of that it did not support the learning. It created a very little culture and was repeatedly invaded again and again. It had no central government. The economy was very bad, and basically it was a miserable place to live. We can see how was the heredity. During those time we had a consul who led the army and called the assembly. It was a praetor. He was supervised by the justice and censor who controlled the promotion of the patrician to the states. We had the magistrate who had the powers over the politics, justice, and the taxation. And he was elected by the comitia, who was the elected magistrate and approved by the laws. The Senate, the most important institutions in the republic, and it could declare war, and it entered to the government patricians. Like this it was formed. And the tribune of the plebeians, it defended the rights of the plebeians. Plebeians is the slaves. They were not allowed to enter into the Senate. Now we will move on to the feudalism. So, after the fall of the Roman Empire, children, the political and the social status of many of the European countries, there was a confusion. The situation became very worst after the death of the Charlemagne, who was the Roman emperor, and anarchy prevailed, and they had no protection for life and property. At such a critical situation, a new political and economic system took birth in the Western Europe. This we call it as feudalism. The farmers cultivating the cultivable land, were made a part of feudalism. There were many restrictions which were put on them. They did not get the right result for their hard work. Even while paying the annual rent, the feudal lords were displaying their power unnecessarily. So, this was feudalism. So, the feudal system was a system of land ownership which was based on the political and the economic basis. In medieval Europe, the status of a person was based on the extent of the land owned by him. How much land he owned, on that he had the status. The income from the land was the only means of earning what he had. The king used to distribute. He used to distribute the lands to the lands to the noblemen, and these noblemen used to distribute these lands to the farmers. In the feudal system was designed to fulfill only the specific services. So we can see that the king and queen. Next we had the ladies and lords and ladies, then the knights, then the peasants and the serfs. This was the order. So feudalism, it can also be called as an agreement between the powerful lords and the weak farmers, children. The powerful men who had the lands were called as the nobles, and the people who took the land from the nobles, they were called as a vassal. The nobleman had the duty of protecting the weak vassal, and in turn the vassal, what he had to do, in return he had to do some of the services. So this feudalism system was based on mutual giving and taking. This system emerged in all the classes and the associations and organization during this medieval period. So unfortunately, the feature and the structure of this system was never implemented uniformly. The lands which was graded, the lands were granted in the beginning of the century of the feudalism were of the life with full entitlements. So, by the 8th century, the kings started retaining the ownership with them and granted the rights to cultivate their land to the nobles and the vassals. Like that, the land belonging to the church were given. The smaller kings also started following the same thing. So after the 9th century, the grants became hereditary, and most of the churches became a part of the feudalism. The right to the feudatory rulers increased over the lands, and they became a hereditary property. So in order to protect the granted lands from the division, one system came into effect that we call it as the primogeniture, and the changes were made in the system, and the practice of subgranting the lands were continued. This means the feudatory kings who received the grants of the lands from the kings, then they granted these lands to their subordinates. The bonded farmers were the backbone of the entire economy. Let us move on to what is the nature of the feudalism. So the land which was held by the vassals, they were considered as gift which was given by the rulers. So the feudalism, it had consisted of two important traditions, children. One was the investiture and the second one was the homage. So we had to know what do we mean by investiture. Under this investiture tradition, the Lord gave the assurance of justice and protection to the vassal while giving the land. So what do we mean by homage? Homage means handing down of power according to the customs. So under this tradition, the vassal had to promise that they will be loyal and they will do the service to the feudal lord. So this we mean by homage. A 2 marks question might be asked. What do you mean by investiture and homage? 2 marks question. So there were hierarchies among the feudal lords, children. Among them we had the dukes. We can see here the investiture and the ceremony of homage here in this picture. So the important among them, the few hierarchies of the hierarchies among the feudal lords, they were called as the dukes, earls, barons, knights, like this they were called. So the vassals had to help the took the help of the laborers to do the agriculture. So these laborers were given sufficient land for survival as long as they worked with the vassals. But they were not given any monetary, that is any finance in return. Now we will move on to the next topic, that is the effects of feudalism. Before moving to the effects of feudalism, let us see the feudalism, how it was then and how it is now. The medieval feudalism, it is by rank, and we are having on the other side we are having the corporate feudalism. So we had the monarchs, that is the king, queens and emperors. Now we are having the central bankers, that is the Federal Reserves and the Bank of Japan. Next we are having the landed gentry, that is the duke, earls, barons. Now we are having the big bankers like J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs. Next we had the clergy, that is we had the priest and the archbishops. Now we are having the corporate allied, that is the fortune and the multinationals. Next we had the royal ministers. Here we are like the chancellors, constables, sheriffs. And on the corporate feudalism, we had the elected officials like president, MPs and the representatives. And during the medieval feudalism, we had the merchants, that is the traders, explorers, East India Company. Here we have the top bureaucrats, commissioners, secretaries, judges. Here we had the vassals, tenant farmers, military officers. Here we are having the top professionals, that is the doctors, entertainers, clergy. Everyone else, that is the remaining, that is the peasants, laborers and the conscripts. Here everyone else is the workers, students and soldiers. So this shows the feudalism, how it was then during the Middle Ages and now the present day. Now let us move on to the next topic, the effects of feudalism. The effects of feudalism. So the independent farmers they had a very small portion of land, children, and for that they used to pay the rent for what the land they were using. So we can see that on the other hand they had to work in small lands which were given to them, and out of that their living as well as the work free of cost in the feudal owners land. So the soldiers were from the ruling class. They had children absolute control over the military. So both the political and the economical power were in one place. So the justice system in the villages were honored in the house of the feudal lords, that is in the manual system. The feudal landlords had to depend upon the vassals. Had to depend upon the on the vassals for the military human power. This restricted the exploitation of these classes, and there were also changes which took place in the economic system during this time. The barbarians who had the power they brought under their control, and human beings realized that their rights and duties were under this system. Along with that, the system was also, this feudalism also encouraged the creative output in the literature in the countries like England, France, and Germany. Rules were also framed. The noblemen who got trained in these rules, with this noblemen, women, and the weaker people became the protector of Christianity, children. Feudalism slowly nourished the emergence of the cities. They become the center of trade and articrafts. New business association came into existence. So, by the 14th century, there were many poor farmers who were punished from the agriculture, As the result of this system, an important ruling class emerged, and there was a clashes which took place between the ruling class. Among themselves, the ruling class, the feudal lords, and the vassals. Due to this, the problems, the agreements of feudalism which was done during this time broke down. So, in some cases, the feudal lords they started competition against their rulers. Many became the traitors of their own countries and became a threat to their own regional unity. So the judicial system also suffered from lack of uniformity. Moreover, there were clashes between the church and the state. Now let us move on to the next topic, that is the decline of feudalism. The disease that was engulfed during the 14th century, it killed upon 3.5 crores of people, or 1/3 of the population were pushed into death. So this we call it as a Black Death in history. With the recurrence of plague periodically, the situation became more severe. So, as a result of this, there was a loss in the agricultural production, and income automatically became less, and the demand for food grain also went down because it affected the agriculture. In the absence of the able-bodied people made the farmers very strong. So, in order to counter the agitations of the farmers, the feudal lords tried to impose more and more traditional duties on the farmers. This resulted in the social unrest, and revolts became common across the Europe. So these are the reasons for the decline of feudalism, which led way to the emergence of the capitalism in Europe. So in the next class, we will study about the modern Europe, So with this, we finish up with the chapter, the Europe in Middle Ages. Thank you, children.